Hello and welcome back to another installment of Analyst Hour. I'm Andrew Regan, along with my co-host Michael Goldsmith. We'll just hop right into it. Mike, we have 2 rounds of playoffs under our belt, and the championship game is all that remains. But before we get to the championship game, we got to talk about these 2 rounds because we had our first ASL postseason forfeit of all time. We got to talk about that, and we got to touch upon the Pack Pride, and then we'll obviously go into the conference championship after. So let's get going. So, what are your thoughts on the Pack and the Pride?
So yeah, the
Big
Pack
takeaway.
Pride series. Both teams played their heart out. It was by far the most physical action we've had in the ASL since last year's postseason. Playoff intensity was there, both emotionally and physically. It was clear. Both teams came to play. Steve Shaw, you could see he was frustrated after that. After losing to the Spartans, not getting the bye for the first time in his career, so he was definitely frustrated, and it showed on the court. He came out with a vengeance, scored a quick 6 points, made it 6-0. Eventually, in game one, and eventually the Pride went up 8-0. But Alex Pisacreta, despite the series loss, played his best basketball he played all season. Again, it started 8-0 Pride. Pisacreta responded with a 7-0 run himself, and it was back and forth in the end. I believe the final score was like 15-11, 15-12, but it was a hard fought game. But it almost felt like if the Pride weren't able to win that game with Pisacreta playing the way he was, that the Pack weren't able to win that game, it was gonna be hard to beat him because Pisacreta couldn't have played any better. Costa, in terms of the Pride, Costa finally stepped up. We all knew it was coming. He had been taking smart open shots all season long. They weren't falling. He came ready for the playoffs. He was drilling his shots, and that's just the nail in the coffin because we all know how good Steve Shaw is. And we talked even in the preseason, we're talking about this. If Steve Shaw getting a player the talent of Costa is terrifying, and it showed that series. Game one was close. Game two, not so much. I believe it was like 14-6. Really, it was just again the Shaw and Costa show. Not that Pat played particularly bad, but Pat understood that his two teammates had those red rings under him. They were red hot, and he allowed them to do their thing. He had more of a facilitator role. He did his job. In terms of Arvin did his job defensively, wasn't hitting his shots. It definitely was no collapse like we saw with the Super Pandas. Rang didn't even have many shot opportunities, but when he had them, they didn't really drop, which, as I said before, teams that live and die by the three have a hard time maintaining success, and it really showed. I mean, it was their only bright spot really was Alex Pisacreta, and that almost got him a game, but it was a hard fought series. Steve Shaw and Costa deserve all the credit in the world. The Pack deserve credit for putting up a fight, but there really was not much you could do. And it was honestly, we talked about this before the season too, is that they don't have no height, and it really burned him on the interior because even if Steve Shaw wasn't draining all those corner threes, he was just punishing them inside, and they just had to put their hands up and pray. So it was really, as I said, a hard fought series. Pack should hold their head high. It was a hell of an effort, but there was not much they were going to do to overcome Steve Shaw and Costa playing out of their minds. And yeah, that's really all I got to say about that.
Yeah, I'll reiterate. I watched it back on YouTube, and it was really good to see 2 things. One, it was really good to see Pisacreta really turn into his vintage self in a time where his team needed it. Unfortunately, it was too little too late, but it was still great to see him not embarrass defenders, but kind of render their defense useless, especially on that 7-0 run, like you had mentioned. And it was also really good to see Costa come into his own as well, because we knew it was in there, like you had mentioned. It was great that it came out at the right time. And hopefully, for the Pride's sake, we get a lot more of this going forward. But yeah, I think you touched on everything. Great series. Unfortunately, Pack, you guys put up a great fight, great season, but it's hard to go up against Steven Shaw. We got to go over to the other conference, the West. We had our first postseason forfeit, and the Hatamotos had ultimately had to forfeit to the Billies. I guess we'll touch a little bit on that. The whole situation was kind of screwed up, unfortunately. Obviously with Jack Curtin's injury, and then I could be wrong. I'm not sure how communicative the Hatamotos are off the court. They certainly weren't in this past few weeks, because it was near impossible to get a game scheduled with them. And then unfortunately, one person was away, one person wasn't communicating. It just really kind of turned into a shit show. And they kind of have to do that, unfortunately. Mike, your thoughts?
I mean, yeah, and it's a brutal way for the Hatamotos to go out. I mean, I don't think anyone saw them really contending after Curtin's devastating torn meniscus injury, which great news. He had a successful surgery, so we're all happy to hear that. But at that one when he was the MVP, can't go those first 4 weeks of the season. When you lose someone of that caliber, there's not much you can do to respond. There's not much you can do to bounce back from that. Even if they ended up having a sub, which they would have, because you couldn't get more than it was hard to get more than one of them to be able to play at a tournament. I mean, it is what it is. I mean, it definitely, as a Billy, definitely didn't feel good advancing that way, but there's not much more we could do.
I mean, I was just gonna say, like, we kind of gave them all the opportunities that we had.
Yeah, I mean,
like
we
Monday,
were
Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday.
we basically said we will play you any single day from that Sunday between
You
the
name
following
it.
Saturday. Any of those days, we could have gotten three of us there, and they were unable to get it there. And I don't necessarily think it's a lack of devotion. I think it's tough time scheduling. It's also tough when one of your four players, especially that being your captain, is unable to.
Yeah, take the wind out of your sails for sure.
With the exception of Carter Brzezinski, it was pretty hard to get anyone else to even respond to us. So there's not much more that really could have been done on our end. I mean, I know I'd love for them to want them to be here to speak for themselves, but if they couldn't show up to the court, they wouldn't show up to this to defend themselves anyway. So I don't know. It's all right. They had a hell of a season.
And they were good sports about it too. Like it sucks because when we write like the whole like when we come up with these rules to add structure to this, we write the terms and people agree when the term they agree to the terms, and then the terms obviously apply. And it sucked that they apply to this situation because you never want to see a forfeit, but the show must go on. And like I said, they were really good sports about it as well. They were very, very respectful. And yeah, there's not really much more we can touch on there. But now that that's over, we have to talk about the conference finals. It was an incredible series of events. We were recording on Monday, so it will be yesterday. And great action. Unfortunately, Andover's team, the Spartans, were swept by Stephen Shaw and the Pride. We'll do that because that was a shorter series. So we'll hit on them first, and then we'll go over to the West. So, Mike, initial thoughts, initial takeaways on the Eastern Conference Finals.
Yeah, well, we talk a lot on this podcast about, did one team lose a series or did one team win a series? The Spartans did not lose that series. The Pride simply won. I mean, Steve Shaw, they have unlike the Pack, they have the height. They have Campbell Prentice, they have Nick Resendez, two taller players, two excellent interior and perimeter defenders, and there still was not much more they can do. I mean, it's not like Steve Shaw was getting left open. He was drilling just tough shots, smothered shots, and there's only so much you could do. I mean, and if they even started to smother him, he would just back up more and more to get to 35 feet. He's still hitting him. What are you supposed to do? Pat Arsh hit his threes. He has really developed as a three-point shooter. I don't think we've seen a player just because throughout his career, he's a facilitator, he's a driver, he's a perimeter defender. He was never known as a shooter. And he has just evolved his game so much. I don't know if he was putting work in the offseason. I don't know if they were just falling, but Pat Arsh deserves all the credit in the world for developing a three-point shot. Costa maintained that success that I just mentioned in the that he had in the Pack series. That didn't go anywhere. Playoff Costa should be a new thing. I know we compared him to James Harden at one point, but he's kind of like the opposite, where he didn't show up in the regular season, but when it came playoff time, he met the moment. So it's good to see. Costa, it's crazy he fell to Steve Shaw, but honestly, it was regardless of how good Costa and Patville played, it was the Steve Shaw show. He's the GOAT for a reason. I mean, I think in terms of the Spartan, I actually loved their ball movement. I love their shot selection. I love their defense. There's not much to complain about. They had some sloppy possessions, but there's just not much more you're going to do. I mean, I think all four of the Pride's games in the playoffs so far have been like 12 minutes or less. Like, no matter how good you play on the offensive end, if you're giving up 15 points in less than 12 minutes, it's going to be tough, especially a team with Steve Shaw. He gets all the credit in the world for being the offensive talent he is. But when he's mad and he's locked in on defense like he is, like, what do you do? Pat Arsh, as I just said, is a good perimeter defender. Costa isn't known for his defense, but he's guarding the third option because he has two great defenders guarding the first two options. It's just really, it's not much you could do. The Spartans looked helpless, and it wasn't even their own fault. And I'm just, it just shows how incredibly impressive it was that Spartans were able to beat Steve Shaw and the Pride full strength week, or I guess not full strength, missing Steve Troy, of course, which is quite the detriment. They were, but it's incredible they even beat him week 6 to get that first round bye, because it's not like I don't think he was trying any harder. It just he just was playing more like himself. And yeah, the Spartans, similar to the Pack, it's like you can't beat yourself up for that. You lost to an incredible player. You lost to an incredible team. And yeah, the Pride, we called them mortal early on. They looked mortal, but clearly they weren't to this point in the season.
Yeah. It sucks to go out the way the Spartans did. They played a great game, but unfortunately it was just out of their reach. They're playing against Stephen Shaw, and every Pride member was on their game. Obviously, Stephen's really rarely off. He had a pretty weak first few minutes. He said he was groggy from his nap. So completely understandable. We've all been there. But unfortunately, once those 3 minutes were up, it was up, because he obviously turned it on. Costa came to play, Pat came to play, and Pat's ability to now stretch the floor on the offense with his 3-point shot has really been incredible to witness. These guys can hit it from pretty much anywhere and everywhere. They all are very good at creating their own shots as well. So offensively, they are such a versatile team with a very diverse approach. They all can finish. They all can create their own shot in the mid-range, and obviously they can all hit a three. So, playing against them definitely is not easy, and that's why you really have to be efficient when you play the Pride, because you're not going to get a ton of possessions, and you need to maintain every single possession you have, because as soon as you lose it, I mean, they're going to go on a run. They rarely score 1 point at a time. So again, Spartans, you guys are Andover's team forever and always. It was a pleasure to watch you play. It was a pleasure to watch you grow as a team as well. But unfortunately, you met your maker and Stephen Shaw. But yeah, and Mike, any closing remarks on that series?
No, I mean, yeah, it's tough to say farewell to the Spartans, because starting 1-3 and going to the first round bye, having such chemistry off the court when they barely played together, barely even talked to each other before the season. So, and we touched on it a lot. The Spartans have gotten glazed plenty of times this podcast. We'll do one last time. They deserve all the credit in the world. They are what the ASL is all about, and it sucks to see them go. But the Pride, I mean, they have 3 deadly 3-point shooters, which no other team in this league has. So and when Stephen Shaw is the best one of those, it's just, yeah, what are you going to do? It's tough to see the Spartans go, but the Pride deserve all the credit in the world, and we'll see if they can continue their playoff success into the finals.
Yeah. Now we'll go over the Western Conference Finals. The Vikings defeated the Billies 2-1. I would call it an electric series, both as a player and as an analyst. The crowd was into it. A lot of ups, a lot of downs, a lot of runs, but ultimately the Vikings came out on top. I just got to say, I think Colin Kirkpatrick is playing his best basketball he has ever played in his life. I just don't know how we can top this. You want to talk about rendering a defender useless? It's been Colin Kirkpatrick for a majority of this season. He's been doing a great job. Just to kind of break it down, game 1, Vikings came out hot, kind of embarrassed the Billies. The Billies did not find their offensive footing at all. I don't think the Vikings put up their 15 in an incredible pace. Kudos to the Billies defense, but just because the Billies were not getting anything to fall, that game was relatively quick. Game 2, Billies came out swinging, and for the majority of that game, they were really landing. Shots were falling. They found their footing offensively, maintaining their defensive intensity. And then towards the end of that game, Colin Kirkpatrick became Colin Kirkpatrick and was kind of hitting all these threes, kind of put the team on his back and kind of trudged his way back into a 13-13 game. And obviously Ryan Cadigan hit the game-winning shot to send it into game 3. And then game 3 was kind of like a game 1. Billies could not find their offensive footing. Vikings, I would, kind of just kept it. Vikings definitely deserve the win. Cheap first three. I'm gonna put on my player cap. Cheap first 3 minutes by the Vikings. I'm glad the Billies lost by a lot, because if that was a one possession game and the Billies lost, I would be salty about it. I obviously can't now because those plays didn't matter. But I'll put the analyst cap back on. Incredible win by the Vikings. I think they are absolutely the best team in the Western Conference. So they really are doing a great job representing the Western Conference when they go to the finals. I thought everyone showed up on the Vikings, Colin especially. AJ played his role really well. Ian played his role, George, and they have just been such a consistent team all year. I don't know if that consistency is going to win them the ship. I think they all need to really play like 120%, which I don't think they have yet. And then the Billies, just it's show up or show out in the playoffs, and you can't show up for one game in a series and then expect to win. I thought they had a great year overall. Obviously, they catch a lot of flack for being a commissioner's team, and I think Ryan Cadigan is also pretty underrated as well. But overall, I thought the Billies had a great year and they put up a great fight against the Vikings. But ultimately, the Vikings were the better team and are representing the Western Conference in the ASL Finals. Mike?
Yeah, I think you touched on a lot of great points. I think Colin, as good as he is as a player, he knows how to run a team better than anyone in this league. I mean, their system with the picks and how they all know where to be at the right time, that is all coming out of the mind of Colin Kirkpatrick. It's why I chose him for IQ on my build a player, because he just orchestrates that offense so incredibly, not only for himself to thrive, but for every single person on the floor to thrive. I think Nick Zelanskis did as good of a job as anyone's ever going to do guarding Colin, and he still went off. So that's just as much credit. That's just credit to him at that point, because Nick Zelanskis, especially in that game too, he was starting to get under his skin a little bit with his defense, and Colin still bounced back, just hit his shots. I mean, if you need to take a few steps further back to get open looks, he did it. And what Zelanskis didn't want to guard him from 35 feet, but you got it when he's doing that, and that burned the Billies. And it's not Nick Zelanskis' fault. As I said, he played incredible defense. It is what it is. The picks they set are just with all three of them can set incredible picks, and it just frees everyone up, and you have to choose switch, not switch everything, and it makes life hell for a defense. You always have to be on your toes. I do have a criticism of the Vikings by their excellent performance. I think, just as a Billy, every time I saw George on the floor in comparison to Ian, I was nervous. George completely outplayed Ian on both ends. And keep in mind, Ian has had a great season offensively, but every time that Ian was on the floor, I was excited because he's slower than George, and usually with them, it's George is there for the defense, Ian's there for the offense. George did better on both ends, and I don't understand why Colin's still stuck with Ian. It cost him that game too. Luckily, Colin didn't even give it a chance for him to cost him game 3, but I don't understand why Ian's getting more minutes than George Boris. He's simply a better player. He's scarier on both ends, and I think if they're gonna beat the Pride, they need to understand that they need to have their best lineup of the floor at all times. And again, Ian's a MIP nom. He's a fourth man nom. He's had a good season, but George played out of his mind that series, and there's a lot of credit, and I hope that he sees more of the floor going forward because he's deserving of it. But other than that, that's really the only criticism you can offer the Vikings, because there was just an incredible team win. And the Billies, yeah, they had a good season, started 0-2, found a way to get their shit together, make the playoffs. Forced a game 3 in the conference finals, but you can't. The defensive lapses. There was some standing around. There's only you're not gonna. That's inexcusable against a player of Colin's stature and against a team of the Viking stature, and it burned him in the end. So yeah, but it's gonna be exciting to watch the Vikings, see if they can maintain their incredible offensive system in the playoffs, and we'll see what they can do defensively against Steve Shaw and the Pride.
Yeah, so now I want to definitely give our prescriptions for each team to win the ASL championship. I'll go first, kind of give you the lay of the land. You obviously chime in after as you please. For the Pride, it's going to be a lot shorter, so I'll do it first. Stick to your roots. I think you just got to keep an eye on the Vikings for how they run their team. It's pretty obvious. They're a pretty one-dimensional team in terms of plays. It's really only pick setting. And they have incredible chemistry. But in terms of just like, the tangible plays they run, it's very simple. Don't turn into the Billies in week 2. Watch those screens, communicate, keep your eye on everybody, especially the guy who's rolling after the pick. So please just do that and stick to your roots. You have the talent. You can win this game. That's pretty much it. The Vikings. I'm going to put a lot of pressure on Colin Kirkpatrick here. I'm assuming AJ is going to be guarding Steven for majority of the game. However, when Colin is on Steven, that's when Steven, I think, feels more comfortable. He's bigger than Colin. Colin is the number 2 guy in the league. I'm sure that gives an ego boost to Steven, and confidence is half this game. If I'm Colin, get in Steven's face, poke that ball out. You need to let him know that you are really a defensive player. I believe Colin is a defensive player. In fact, I know Colin is a defensive player. He doesn't really need to turn it on defensively because he's so good offensively, but I need to see Colin dig in his heels and get angry when it comes to the ASL championship. Because like I said, Colin has assembled his best team for him. He's been playing his best basketball. If you cannot beat Steven this year, you are never going to beat Steven. It's just not going to happen. You have all your guns loaded. You are playing out of your mind. Colin, full disclosure, Colin got my vote for MVP, and I think he should have everyone else's. He's playing his best basketball. He is manning the best team. If you cannot beat Steven this year, you will never beat him. So, AJ, get gritty. Get Steven angry. Colin and Steve are very similar players, but they differ in this sense. When Colin is flustered, he flourishes. When Steven is flustered, he crumbles. That's why Steven has lost this year, because he can get flustered. If you see Steven swearing under his breath or throwing the ball at something, you have him exactly where you want him. You need things to stand in front of Steven's talent. And the only thing that has really stood in front of Steven's talent is his emotions. So if you can get under Steven's skin by playing aggressive, poking that ball out of his hands, making him feel like he's hopeless, you have him right where you want him. And then it just becomes finish your plays on offense. If you cannot get Steven's emotions to stand in front of his talent, there is no shot you are going to win this game. So keep running your plays. Keep doing it. You have a very high success rate. So keep doing that. If the Pride find a way to consistently stop those plays, you're kind of done for. But you got to stick to your guns in that sense. Keep running those plays until they show that they are inevitably not going to work. Make sure that I agree. When it comes to defense, you gotta play George more. I don't really agree with you in the thing that I think George is leaps and bounds better than Ian. I don't agree with that.
I said I think he played leaps and better. I think in that series he was playing leaps and bounds better than Ian, and I think he should have been out more. I'm not saying as basketball players. I'm saying in that series.
Yeah, I guess I'll weigh in. I think George played better than Ian. I don't think Ian played poorly. I think Ian just was forgettable. He had a forgettable performance where George
left his mark all over that series.
What?
I think George left his mark all over that series in contrast.
Yeah, no, I think George played well. I don't think Ian played poorly. I just think he played forgettable. Anyway, I digress. Yeah, you got to get George to play aggressive. Colin, it really is all on you when it comes to defense. You are the captain of this team. You can definitely lead them on offense. There's no surprise about that. You got to lead them on defense. This is the best offensive team probably the league has ever seen in terms of player to player to player. Shaw, Zinzopoulos, and Pat. So you really have to dig your heels in defensively. Everyone needs to give everything they have on defense because that's truly what it's going to be. And also you have to maximize every offensive possession. They know your playbook. So you also have to get creative. Definitely run your pick and rolls and kind of get a temp check of how the Pride are responding to those. And obviously if they're not responding, keep doing that. But if they are responding, you have to get creative because we haven't seen a ton of diversity with the Vikings offense like we have with the Pride. So you got to get creative. And you got to have, and Colin's got to have faith in their players. There's no doubt Colin's going to get doubled at times. So that guy who's not doubling Colin, be aware of AJ because that's usually his right-hand man. He's going to pass to him first. But yeah, all in all, I need Colin to step up immensely on defense. Not that he's been lacking. He hasn't had to, there hasn't really been a calling for him to step up defensively. Now there is. So he is going to have to step up defensively and get under Steven's skin. That is really how you got to do. And then if your offense isn't working fluidly, and the Pride really came to play defensively, you got to get creative. So you got to have a plan B and plan C just in case. But that's really just about it for me. Mike,
Yeah.
what about you?
Well, so yeah, and also let's keep in mind that these teams, obviously every team played every team in the regular season, and the Vikings had a narrow victory over the Pride. Both teams were full strength, and they really need to replicate exactly what they did. They made it incredibly physical, and we know if one team is going to thrive physically over the other, it's going to be the Vikings over the Pride. I believe AJ guarded Steve Shaw the majority of the season, and I believe he also guarded Steve Shaw better than I've ever seen anyone guard Steve Shaw. I mean, he's been his teammate for 2 years. They're friends. They know, like he knows Steve Shaw's game better than even we do, and he face guarded him. He frustrated him in that particular game. It was at nights, and you saw that the frustration you're talking about. Steve Shaw, that was the most frustrated I've ever seen him on the court. A lot of throwing the ball off the wall, a lot of swearing, a lot of just pure anger on his part. Because when you're that good and you're just not neutralized, but you're that contained, it's got to be incredibly frustrating. And AJ knows what to do. I trust that he'll be able to replicate that performance, but it still might not be enough. I mean, this team is an offense. Both teams are offensive juggernauts. I think the Vikings are much stronger defensively, but the Pride's offense might outweigh that, especially the way that now with Costa getting involved and looking like himself, it's going to be scary. I think the Vikings need to just stick to their system. They need to try to confuse the Pride to the best of their abilities, because they were able to do that in that last game with the pick and rolls, similar to not nearly as bad as they exposed the Phillies in week 2, but their picks did confuse the Vikings on defense and enabled them to get a victory. I mean the Pride on defense.
Right.
So overall, yeah, I think Colin needs to have the game of his life. I wouldn't be surprised if he does, and that still might not be enough. Like a lot more needs to go right for the Vikings than the Pride for the Vikings to pull this out. And they need to study that tape. I think the Pride need to study that tape. I think the Pride need to not only stretch the floor, and they can't get complacent with relying on threes, but they also have to attack the basket, because I think the Vikings are a much better perimeter defensive team than interior. So even though all of them, or at least in terms of Costa and Steve Shaw, they're much more 3-point shooters. They need to be confident in their drive. They need to try to attack the basket. AJ can smother Steve all he wants, but Steve has like 4 inches on him at least. So if you can get down to the paint, there's not much you could do. I don't know who's going to be guarding him, AJ or Colin. I would guess AJ, just because of the physical body mass that AJ has to be able to prevent him from blowing by him. But we'll see what happens. I think what's incredible about this game is it's not only the ASL championship. You know, the winner doesn't only get the ring, but this game determines who the GOAT is going into next season. Steve Shaw has 2 rings. Colin has 1. Steve has beaten Colin in a previous season, but if Colin has 2 rings and wins the MVP this year, we'll see what happens. I voted for him as well. I don't know the results, but I'd be shocked if he didn't win. But I think that this season, this game determines who the GOAT is, and they both need to play like the best player of all time to win this game. And it's going to be incredible to see that we're seeing both team and individual legacy on the line in this game. I cannot wait. It's going to be a spectacle for the ages, and I do not expect, regardless of who wins, I do not expect it to be a blowout like the Teeny Weenies Caddyshack game was 2 seasons ago. So we're going to see what happens.
Yeah, two things before we kind of do our final predictions and we kind of talk about the championship as a whole and how it's going to work. Number one, both before I put a cap on my prescriptions for both teams, one thing I will say that both teams should do the same thing. Vikings had the advantage here because they've done it in the past, but both teams should hunt the mismatch. If you can put Pat on Colin, do it. And then if you can put Steven on Ian, do it. Hunt those mismatches.
Mm-hmm.
I'll finally put the cap. Now we got to talk about this draft night. Colin made one of the biggest jugular shots in ASL history when it comes to draft night by stealing AJ Clark away from Stephen Shaw. Let's fast forward a few months. They face each other. Actually, before we fast forward, let's not forget that everyone was suspicious that AJ was not bought in on being a Viking, considering his public
including myself.
considering the public trade requests on the comment sections. Now we can fast forward. They face each other in the ASL finals. What does this mean for AJ if the Vikings win?
I mean, AJ has possibility similar to Steve Shaw. AJ, similar to Stephen Pat, AJ has a possibility of being a 3-time champion, but he'd do it with 2 completely different teams. So it would be incredible. I mean, AJ has absolutely his legacy. No matter what happens, this game is cemented because shout out to him. He obviously, in the moment in that draft, he had to have been crushed. Not even because he's playing, not because of who his teammates were, but because who they weren't. I mean, you've been playing with Stephen Pat 2 seasons in a row. You want the 3-peat. You know how much that means. And obviously, at first, he was frustrated. He made that pretty public. And he has been so mature about this whole situation. Credit to him for showing up and not just half-assing it and not just watching Steve Shaw's games and wishing he was there. He is so bought in, and it's the reason that the Vikings are here. Because if he wasn't at 100% every single game, they wouldn't be. I mean, it's incredible what he's done on both ends of the floor. He's gritty. He's smart. He puts his body on the line. It's awesome to see. AJ, if anyone's going to be if anyone's going to win 3 years in a row in this league, AJ deserves it just because of how amazing he's handled the situation. And I'm glad it did reward him in getting back into the finals, even though it was at the Bills' expense, which sucks as a player. But AJ Clark deserves it more than anyone else. And I think win or lose, his legacy is cemented. But if they win this game, it does put a question mark on how much did he really mean to those Steve Shaw 2 rings. I mean, obviously Steve Shaw was the catalyst to both of them, but he was their first overall pick in both those series.
I got to interrupt you. To this season, he totally added to the teeny weeny season, but no other person on planet Earth added to the teeny weenies victory when Stephen Shaw put up 19 points.
In the ASL finals, in that particular ASL finals.
Game. Yeah, I know what you mean.
Yes, that one game, yes. But I'm saying even in last year's finals, I don't know how many points who scored what, but AJ also had an incredible performance. I expect to have another one in this finals, but we'll see. But AJ, yeah, he's done great things for his reputation. Not that it was ever in jeopardy, but good for him. We'll see what happens. We'll see if he can play that same defense he played on Steve Shaw last series, and if he clamps Steve Shaw and the Vikings win, it is a partial stain on Steve's legacy that he gave up his first overall pick and then he comes and clamps him in the regular season and the playoffs and beats him twice. It's going to be fascinating to watch.
Student becomes the teacher. Yeah, it's going to be crazy. All right. We are going to have a full analyst hour segment dedicated to like a novelty game. So that's why we're not going to do it this episode. And that's why it's going to be a little bit shorter. But just to reiterate, the ASL Championships date has not been solidified yet. We do want to make sure that everyone can show up. So that's still in the works. We will obviously publish it when we know. And it's currently being figured out by both the teams. It's going to be 1 game to 21. Bring your friends and their mothers because we want the atmosphere to be good for both teams because they deserve it. And if you don't show up because you lost, you're a bitch. Sorry.
Before we sign off, we have to predict the final score because
obviously, yes.
For those diehard fans, probably remember that last season I picked it would be 21-16 Funky Monkeys over Stampede, and that happened to be the final score. So whatever I have to say here, maybe you should take it into account.
Wait, can you say something?
Oh, are we doing it now? Okay, all right. 21-14 Pride.
My heart is telling me 21-19 Vikings, but my mind is telling me 21-16 Pride. So I'm going to have to lock in 21-16 Pride.
We shall see. And honestly, if the Vikings
ChatGPT what it thinks too.
If the Vikings prove me wrong, I'll be happy because no one deserves it more than Colin. I mean, And honestly, no one deserves it more than Ian either. I mean, it would be pretty funny to see Ian lose 4
0
of 7
4 in
ASL
hell. We
finals.
can't even call it
But
0 3 and we got to.
yeah, I mean, it would no. As funny as it would be to see Ian lose 4 of the 7 ASL finals, he deserves this more than anyone. He shows up every week. He busts his ass. He has gotten so much. I know I kind of slandered him a little bit, but it was more credit to George, more just a question about that particular series. But Ian deserves all the credit in the world. He deserves a ring just as much as anyone in this league. So it would be nice to see him finally get that.
Oh my God. I think I'd cry if I saw Ian
I think
hold up
he'd
that
cry too.
trophy.
Yeah, no, Ian deserves it. He like I'd love to see Colin. Honestly, I'd love to see all four of the Vikings win, and not to say that I don't want to see the Pride win, but three of those four people have already won a ring. Costa deserves it very much too, but Ian has just poured his heart and soul into this. He will have played in more than half the ASL finals.
Yeah, this
He
has got to be
deserves
like
it.
5 years in the making for Ian. Ian has probably clocked in the most ASL minutes ever. It's just because he
Yeah.
makes it to the finals every year. Yeah, it would be great to see the Vikings win. I'm by no means a Pride hater. I have nothing but 110% respect for the Pride. It would be nice to see someone win other than Steven though, as a commissioner. Um, but I'm also a big fan of who deserve. I want the winners to deserve it, or I want those who deserve it to win it, and that's ultimately what it's going to be. These are the best teams in their conferences, so it's good to see that they are. It's the most deserving teams competing for this trophy, which is great. But yeah, any other closing remarks, Mike?
I just hope everyone has fun.
Yeah, that's all that matters. Safety and fun.
Yeah.
No other closing remarks?
Okay. No, I mean, yeah, it's gonna be, yeah, please show up. Like, just enjoy it. Like, don't be mad that you lost. Show up, enjoy the show.
We haven't had
These
an issue.
are,
I just said that to be funny. We've never really had an issue like that ever.
well, I mean, not that people have not showed up because of us, but people just I don't know, just keep your schedule clear. This is gonna be a show. You're watching two incredible talents. You're watching two incredible teams. Show up, enjoy it. It's gonna be a spectacle.
Yeah, bring your
And
lawn chairs.
yeah, bring a cold one. It's
Yeah,
gonna
bring a cold one.
it is gonna be incredible. I wish I could fast forward to that game right now. And I love all 8 of those guys that are playing as players and as people, and all of them it'd be awesome if they all won, even if and I'm just, yeah, it's gonna be a hell of a show, and props to all them for making it. I wish every player best of luck, and yeah, it's hard to root against any of those 8 guys, so we'll see what happens.
Yeah, you're right. I think it's a bittersweet because two great teams, two deserving teams, like you said, all 8 guys we love and we deserve, and they all deserve to be there. It sucks to see that one of them will lose, but ultimately it's going to be a great show. So come out. It's going to be a great time. It's the last game of the year, so you got nothing to lose. And we've had great atmospheres in the past, courtesy of Arvin. Arvin's usually very good about bringing a crowd. But yeah, I would love to see every ASL face that is going to be available on that day. And yeah, bring friends. It's going to be a great time. So good luck to both teams. You both deserve it. And yeah, we'll sign off. Thanks for tuning in. Before we do sign off, we will say there will be a ASL novelty show, or yeah, an Analyst Hour novelty show later this week.
Stay tuned. It is going to be crazy.
Yep. All right, guys. We'll see you.